Jesper, you started out formally training as a painter originally, and quite early on in your studies you changed working with video work instead. And I think my question is perhaps twofold. First is a question of, did you abandon painting because you felt it did not offer you enough possibilities, or was it a genuine or different interest in the video format? And also, when did you really begin focusing on the human relation, which is a recurring theme throughout your work?
Thank you. Well, actually, I began with installation. I applied for the Royal Academy with an installation which was made overnight. I didn't put so much thinking in it, and it was actually just 3 garbage bags and a found photo that I delivered. And for some reason they thought that was very fresh and courageous, so they actually accepted me to the academy. And when I was accepted, I said, "Oh, I want to paint," and then they said, "We accepted you on these installations," but then I had that to paint, and then I was painting for 2 years on the same painting, maybe for the 2 years, and didn't really get anywhere. So that was probably the first. That's probably why I realized that didn't really go anywhere, and I started to take photos, and that led into film, slowly into film. So the first few films I did one film first with no humans at all. It was just a place, and then the first video that I did that I actually still show was more like a happening, and that's how I started. I did happenings in the street and filmed them, and then went home and created some kind of narrative from that. The film is in the show in one of the media boxes, and it's just a very simple idea. One man is extremely happy and the other one is crying in the public space, and I just wanted to see what happens when 2 men shows feelings that they're not really allowed to show in a public space. How will the surroundings react? And it was in a place where there's been a lot of riots with police and kids in Copenhagen. And so I was not knowing, I didn't know what would happen, but actually these kids, instead of beating us up, they started to dance along with this man that was dancing and laughing, and while the other guy was crying. But that was kind of the first film, which was just a film happening.
So in relationship to what you said just before, you started out by making a form of happening that people weren't really expecting or aware of. And I think that's a very interesting note, because in a certain sense, your video work now presents also the unexpected. You know the audience will turn up, but the movies themselves become a sort of happening, just as you had a man dancing and a man crying earlier out in real life and then filming it. So did you start making the happenings, the unexpected happenings, because you wanted to exert more control over what you were actually producing? Because in a sense it would have been very easy for you just to continue to make happenings and filming people's reactions to those.
Well, it was something that slowly just became more and more cinematic, the films, but I think what I was interested in was at the beginning was the social conventions of a place, how to behave in public, especially if you are male. That was my starting point. The first many films about male relationships and also male masculinity and male's emotions, men's emotion, especially towards each other. And from working with social conventions in place, I was starting to think about what is depicting or what is who are telling us how to behave at a place. Is it something that is stored in us, or is it something that is told by others? And one thing that constantly tell us how to behave is the movies, and so the cinematic conventions for a place is very often related to the social conventions, and so I wanted to play with that and try and turn those conventions upside down, maybe working with unexpected, building our expectations to a certain place, because everyone knows how to watch a movie, everyone watched movies most of their life, and so what I can do is work with the cinematic language, build up certain expectations, and then try and break them by playing with these conventions, especially for plays. So in a way I feel like I'm still doing the same, it just is become more professional work, and of course more controlled, so it's true that the reaction is maybe more in the audience than rather than at the film location.
I think in relationship to the movie aspect that you just talked about, it's as if often that movies tell us what to do. They show us a way of acting, how we're supposed to behave. They present us with a set of social norms that we help reinforce after we see the films. And I suppose in a certain sense, your work, rather than tell people or show them a way of how they should act and behave, you instead focus on the real aspect of our emotional aspects, how we really feel. But at the same time, you also seem to enable people that social conventions and norms don't give enough voice, such as the black females in the Sirens of Crow film. You're also using, of course, a transgender person. You work with the male relationships, particularly the really deep emotions that I think everyone experiences, regardless of their gender or orientation. Do you at times feel like part of your artistic practice is enabling people, to give people who don't have a voice, to give it back to them?
I think that the difference and the advantage of being in an art institution is that first of all, you don't have to talk to the majority, and you can, because in the film world, film is an industry, especially Hollywood, is based and is based on selling tickets, and it's all about making profit, and therefore they cannot take chances by putting someone in the center of a story that most of the majority can relate to, which could be a transgender woman, for instance. And cinema is kind of building on that, or counting on that everyone understands the film the same way. I'm talking about mainstream film, not just, I mean, of course there's a lot of experimental cinema, but in mainstream film, you will test the film on an audience before the premiere to make sure that everyone gets it. If a number of people don't understand the film, you will try to change it so everyone will get it. I think the art that is interesting to me is art that is asking a question and that doesn't give an answer, and that's why the work that I do is also just a question. And so I hope people are confused and don't know anything, know less when they leave than they did before they came, because I try to keep it very ambiguous, and it looks like something that you understand, but there's actually not really something to understand, because there is no point. It's not like a one-liner. You can understand it in so many different ways. It's all depends on your background, where you come from. Let's talk about the film from Detroit. I'm sure as a Korean, think you have a particularly emotional relationship to Detroit, but for instance, if you're American, it's something that really hurts that this city was the big industrial kind of, I don't know, it was the place where the big three auto companies of America had their factory, still have, but it's you know, it's gone really downhill, and so just by that, I think if you're an American, you'll read that film different than if you are Korean, I'm sure. But what I wanted to do there was make a film with the locals, and 80% are African American who lives in Detroit, and therefore it was just natural that it should be African Americans. Then I thought about this old cinema that I found, and that was turned into a parking house, and I wanted to then work with representation in cinema, and I was thinking, okay, if you're an African American woman, who do you relate to if you watch a Hollywood movie? Because there's never a black woman in the center of a story in Hollywood. So I just wanted to work only with African American women in that film. But you know, I don't think I'm giving the voice back to the African American women, because I don't know how it is to be a black woman in Detroit. But we kind of worked it out together, and as I'm in a position where I can make some movies, I think also I have a responsibility, not just making movies about how it is to be me. Yeah.
It seems in your work there seems to be a lot of focus, particularly in the later works, on architecture and landscapes, and I think it's very interesting because often you feel in some of the newer works that you are stepping into a grand landscape painting. It's also the production level that you exercise at the same time, and I think it's also been born by the sound effects and the music that's an integral part. But particularly, you started making works that are more challenging for the viewer because of their physicality. So while you seem to have a great affinity with the landscape, the urban landscape and the rural landscape, there's also a three-dimensionality to your work now. In this nameless spectacle, of course, there's two screens opposite each other, so you feel like you're almost traveling through a landscape. And this is a landscape of desire. It's presented on a large monolith, which stands out and again adds a level of physicality and weight almost, I would say, along with the sound. Do you think this is a new avenue for your work? And of course you also used it on a very large scale for your Venice presentation. But do you think this is yet another level or boundary to be pushed even further?
I think that I started using just one channel, doing something that looked very cinematic and just trying to break expectations and break cinematic conventions. But then I've been more and more focused on kind of activating the spectator by making it necessary for the spectator to move in space in order to capture the work. As for nameless spectacle, you have two screens, and if you only see one screen, you will miss half of the movie. If you turn your head, you will still miss parts of the movie, but you will connect the characters who are never on the same screen, which means that the spectator creates the connection and is kind of sandwiched by the two screens and caught in this mise-en-scène of what might be going on. The characters are looking at each other by looking in the camera, so it feels like they're looking to the other screen on the other side of the space. and in between that, the audience are kind of placed. And I've worked further with that, with more screens and screens in different rooms where you have to walk from one room to the other in order to capture the whole film work. And in that way you kind of make the spectator the editor of the film. I think that's interesting in relation to cinema, because cinema, you sit for 2 hours in a chair and you are mounted, you have no physicality, you have only your head and you're kind of escaping. What I hope to do is to make people ask themselves, what is it I'm actually watching? Because that, I think, is rare that anyone would do in a cinema. But I think art is, again, a place where you point at something and ask, maybe things could be different. Because in cinema, mainstream cinema, it usually is the same story over and over again, and I don't think it doesn't have to be like that.
너무 사실 디스커션이 재밌어서 좀 더 듣고 싶긴 한데 제도 스케줄이 있어서 어쩔 수 없이 눈물을 머금고 사실 저는 기획자로서 이번 전시를 하면서 상당히 이 작가에 대해서 많이 다시 재발견을 하게 된 부분도 많고요. 그래서 아마 5년 내지 10년 뒤에 좀 더 작가가 마스터의 반열에 올랐을 때 한 번쯤 더 미술관에서 초대전을 해도 괜찮지 않을까라고 생각을 했었는데, 앞으로 향해 갈 방향이 좀 더 많은 설치와 좀 더 많은 움직임, 그것은 좀 더 많은 예산을 의미하기 때문에 다시 생각을 해봐야 되지 않을까. 농담이고요. 지금부터 간단하게 이 플로어에서 그 질문이 있으시면 질문을 받겠습니다. 질문 있으신 분 손을 들어주시고요. 마이크가 갈 때까지 잠깐만 기다려 주시고.
그 네임리스 스펙테클에서 지금 화면을 2개를 사용하시고 향후 화면을 더 많이 사용한다는 그런 전략을 말씀을 해주셨는데, 제가 생각하기에는 그 화면을 양쪽으로 배치하는 것은 어떤 그 전략적인 차원에서, 근데 화면에 몰입을 하게 방해하는, 근데 우리가 전통적인 영화에서는 화면에 몰입을 함으로 인해서 픽션이나 이런 부분에 자기 현실적인 존재감을 잠깐 잊고 감정이입을 하게 되는데, 현대적인 영화에서는 그런 부분을 방해하는 걸 의도적으로 사용을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 혹시 작가가 이 현실감을 정복시키는 어떤 그런 차원에서 3D도 있고 여러 가지 화면을 이렇게 크게 배치하는 측면도 있지만, 그와는 반대적인 측면에서 몰입을 방해하고 영화를 보면서 또다시 현실을 자각하는 어떤 그런 반대의 효과를 의도를 했는 건지, 아니면 제가 보는 이런 해석이 작가의 의도와 다른 건지에 대해서 좀 묻고 싶습니다.
Well, it's true, and I also talked a little bit about before that. It's once you have more screens, the viewers become I want the viewer to become more aware of herself in the space with the film. Whereas in cinema, it's true that you sit down, forget all your problems for 2 hours, and escape. I mean, I don't want to tell the viewer anything or how to behave or what to think, but I pushed something in play, and I think where the nameless spectacle comes from, the whole idea with the 2 screens actually comes from something that was, my idea came from an old fun fair ride that was invented before the cinema, and it was called Stereorama or Marorama, where for instance at the World Fair in Paris, that was in 1900, but I mean film was existing, but it was something that's been going on in the 18th century for a long time. But there they created a big ship in the fair that could go rocks from side to side, and could have hundreds of people, and they would stand on the ship, and it even had smell and lights, and the ship would rock from side to side, and on this, each side of the ship they had these big scrolls of painted landscape of shores, and that would be pulled and give the feeling of traveling while you were in space. And so I wanted to work with that kind of sensation of traveling in space, and it's partly related to that I put the protagonist in the wheelchair, but by putting the protagonist in the wheelchair in the film, I also wanted to put the audience in the wheelchair. So you kind of, it's kind of exactly pointing to what you're saying, that or the opposite, but that I kind of feel like sometimes the audience will are disabled because you only had in the cinema situation, whereas in the art situation you are capable of moving around. And I think when you watch a sculpture, you cannot just watch it from one side. You have to walk around it to experience the whole sculpture. And I think that's what I'm maybe trying also to do with the film, that it becomes a more sculptural element, that you have to move around to experience it, rather than just standing one place. And I think that art should also be a little bit irritating. A film will always be pleasing. Art should be kind of, a little annoyance is okay. That will make you kind of think, whereas film is more about having a pleasure somehow.
질문 하나 더 받아.
저는 큐레이터 분께 질문 드리고 싶은데요. 그 욕망의 풍경에서 그 젊은 여자가 내려오면서 건물 어떤 곳에 막 부비는 장면이 있기도 하고요. 그런데 그 어떤 그 글을 보면은, 큐레이터 분의 글을 보면 건물이 남성성을 상징하는 경우가 있다라고 표현을 하셨는데, 그 부분이 저로서는 조금 잘 모르는 부분이라서 부연 설명을 듣고 싶습니다.
Well, I think there's something very masculine about highways in a certain sense, and I think it's also something that Jesper works with in that particular work. And there's a physicality of the almost stone-like material. Of course, when we see the same highway system from far above, it actually almost looks like a pair of ovaries. So of course there's a constant juxtaposition in there. But there's a tenderness and softness in the woman, particularly when she starts caressing the pillar. And again, I was referring to both the materiality, but also the kind of the symbolism there is in that structure of the male in a square, tall pillar.
마지막 질문 하나.
저는 세 분께 다 드리고 싶은 질문인데요. 모던 컨템포러리 아트를 바라보는 많은 사람들의 시각 중에 하나는 우리나라의 표현 중에 있는 꿈보다는 해석이라는 그런 생각이 많이 드는 경우가 많은 것 같아요. 그만큼 아티스트의 그 꿈과 그 꿈을 해석하는 큐레이터 간의 그 긴밀한 유대관계가 되게 중요한 것 같은데요. 아티스트가 이 큐레이터에게 자기의 작품을 전달할 때 가장 중요하게 생각하는 거랑요. 그리고 큐레이터가 아티스트의 그런 작업을 대중에게 잘 이해시키기 위해, 잘 선사하기 위해 얼마나 많은 프로세스, 과정을 겪어야 되는지, 그리고 많은 그런 콤비네이션이 조합이 있었음에도 불구하고 임백은 학예 연구사께서 이번에 굳이 이 예스퍼유스트와 마이클 크리토퍼슨의 이 조합을 선정하게 되신 그런 배경 듣고 싶습니다.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's not one right way to understand the work. There's not a wrong way. I mean, there's not a wrong interpretation. So if someone comes and says to me that it reminds them of this, or they read it maybe religiously or in another direction, I would never say that it's not correct, because it is correct. And I will I do the work, and again, as I said before, it's more like a question that a point, or more that I put something and I point at it, and people will look at it, and then it will give them something back. So when I've made the work, I actually prefer not to talk about it. I would prefer to sit over there right now. So I would not really like to tell how to think about the work, and because I think that it restricts the piece for the audience. For me, it's important that the work speaks for itself. But of course, you need curators to I guess, lure people to come and see the work.
I think as a curator, for example, working with Jesper, in general working with a lot of artists, one of the most important things we should do is to, when we present a solo show, is to give the artist the best possibilities and premises for showing the work to the fullest, and also, of course, I have a great love of Jesper's works, but I completely agree with Jesper that the interpretation and the experience of the artworks is always going to be subjective, and the fact that Jesper actually actively works with these themes of our own inner experience makes it even more interesting. I think the danger with curating Jesper's shows actually is that you have to be careful not to present a narrative that extends from one work to the other. It shouldn't, with Jesper's work, it shouldn't be like you feel, oh, this work is here because then the next one is here, and it starts making some sort of story that's not intended. It's more about presenting the works individually and giving them their own life, so that you as a spectator can jump from one experience to the other after your own choosing.
사실 한 두 개 정도만 질문을 받고 그만하려고 했는데, 이게 한 번에 세 명한테 질문을 하시는 바람에 제 계획에는 차질이 생겼는데요. 일단 예스퍼유스트라는 작가에 대해서 기본적인 흥미가 참 시작이었다고 생각할 수 있겠죠. 그리고 기본적으로 이 두 사람의 그 포메이션을 제가 선택했다기보다는 실제 해닝 미술관이라는 덴마크 미술관에서 작년 초에 이 예스퍼유스트의 아주 소규모의 전시를 했었어요. 그래서 실제로 그 내용이 비록 작긴 했는데 어떤 컨셉이라든지 여러 가지 그 포커스를 하는 부분이 유스트의 새로운 어떤 페이스를 다시 보여주는 그런 내실 있는 전시라고 판단을 해서, 그때 이제 서로 커뮤니케이션을 하다가 그러면 우리 미술관에서 그걸 베이스로 하되 좀 더 다른 버전의 전시를 만들어보자 해서 다시 이번 전시를 하게 된 거고요. 그래서 자연스럽게 실제로 해닝 미술관이 그 뮤지엄급에서 개인전을 처음 열어준 그런 미술관이기도 해요. 그래서 굉장히 오랫동안 이 작가를 연구해왔던 미술관이기 때문에 실제로 어떻게 저로서는 좀 무임승차를 할 수 있는 아주 절호의 찬스이기도 했죠. 일단 기본적으로 전시를 만들어가면서 다음 질문은 그 전시를 만들어가면서 실제로 작가하고 큐레이터는 끊임없이 인터랙션을 하는 것 같아요. 제 개인적인, 이건 아주 개인적인 의견이 하지만, 처음에 그 기획 의도가 끝날 때까지 비슷하다 그러면 사실 저는 전시로서는 조금 따분한 전시가 아닐까 저는 개인적으로 생각하거든요. 그래서 끊임없이 작가도 변화하고 전시를 준비하는 과정에서 큐레이터도 변화를 해요. 예를 들자면 그 작가가 이번에 몇 가지 초기 작품들 같은 경우 극장에서 이렇게 보여주자고 저한테 제안을 했었거든요. 근데 저는 아마 여러 가지로 이제 생각을 하겠죠. 이제 한국적인 컨텍스트, 우리 문화도 생각을 해야 되고, 물론 작가의 지명도도 생각을 해야 되고, 그래서 아무래도 그렇게 하면 많은 관중들이 그렇게 네 작품을 시간에 맞춰가지고 이렇게 보기는 어려울 것이다. 그리고 또 하나는 이 작품 자체의 특징 자체가 어떻게 보면 그 비디오 아트라는 형식은 가지고 있지만 기승전결에 굉장히 줄거리에 굉장히 포커스를 맞춘 작품이기 때문에 처음부터 사실 보지 않고서는 이 작품을 특히 초기 작품들은 이해했다고 하기가 참 어려운 부분이 있다. 그래서 차라리 그럴 바에는 그 전시장 내에 하나의 그 일종의 가상적인 작은 그 영화관 체험을 만들어주는 게 오히려 더 낫지 않겠느냐 해서 사실 그 전시장 그 앞창 내려가시면 미디어 박스라고 아주 멋진 그 디자인을 제가 한 게 아니라 저는 아이디어만 그리고 우리 그 디자이너들이 멋지게 만들어 놓은 것을 보실 수가 있습니다. 뭐 그런 식으로 어쨌든 물론 이건 아주 그 기술적인 측면이긴 하지만 전체적인 컨셉이라든지 모든 것이 사실은 끊임없이 이볼빙 해간다고 생각하실 수가 있을 것 같아요. 그러면 대단히 죄송하지만 그 질문 원래 하시려고 했던 건 나중에 개인적으로 제가 꼭 질문하실 수 있는 기회를 드리도록 하겠습니다. 그러면 좀 시간 관계상 이 정도로 작가와의 대화 시간은 아쉽게도 마무리를 짓고요. 잠깐 한 5분 정도 이 장례 정리하는 시간을 가진 이후에 우리가 고대하던 퍼포먼스 시간을 가지도록 하겠습니다. 네, 아마 실망하지 않으실 것 같아요. 다시 한번